Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talks with Gallagher, where we have conversations that inspire and empower. Today, I have one of my favorite guests, Craig Miller, and he is the founder of Insights from the Heart. He has been speaking, ministering, and counseling with individuals, families, and couples in the medical and mental health and church settings for a long time. And he's been a repeated guest, a favorite guest, and we're going to be talking about narcissism and other personality disorders. With the start of the new year, it seems like this is a very relevant topic in just addressing mental health, whether that's something that we're personally speaking or with someone that we know that we want to help in some capacity. So I'm just so delighted to have Craig Miller with us to discuss this important topic.
Great to be here with you, John. It is a big topic, and my 46 years in the mental health field. I mean, there's always somebody that has this.
Mm.
So let me tell you a little bit about. Let's start out with personality in general. I mean, personality is really who we are, and it has a lot to do with our traits. And that has to do with, we're only born with temperament, basically strong-willed or compliant. But then as we grow up into the environment, and usually our parents and the main characters in our life, and also school, church, the people that are most influential will shape that personality, help create attitudes, thoughts, behaviors come out of that. You know, in terms of personality disorders, only 9% of the US population have it. But
Mm.
and that may seem like it's a small number, but really is large in comparison, though, to other things. Plus, I think it's really underestimated at a big deal because, and I'll get into this, but typically personality disorders are not seen by the person themselves. Often you have to be told that you have it, and you don't see it in yourself because it's who you are. So
Wow.
it is a big deal.
Yeah, it really is a big deal because it can affect people around you because they might be seeing a slightly different version of reality, and that could affect that person and how they perceive you and how they perceive reality itself. You there? Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We lost the connection a little bit, I think. So it has a lot to do with who we are, and because it's shaped during that time of life, who we are. What happens is we don't know we have something wrong because it's created over time, and oftentimes people have to tell us. I mean, but we don't like to be told, so that's why it's not dealt with a lot because I don't want to hear about it or I deny it.
Mm.
Right. So let's
Right.
let's get into some of the more specifics. And there's 9 or 10 more specific types of personality disorders, and the one that's most common is narcissism, right? And that's a lot to do with in our life. So I had to look some of this up so I can get really specific, but it's a personality. Oftentimes, narcissists have a personal perception of being superior. And it may not necessarily come out that way, but it's kind of a feeling side. There's an
Mm.
excessive need for attention, admiration, kind of praise. And usually there's a lot of lack of empathy with this.
Mm.
And it's your decisions as a narcissist is really made about all your decisions are what about me?
Mm.
What is what are what when I make this what's in it for me? That usually is what the decisions are made out of.
Mm.
So what happens though, there's less of a empathy for others, and usually they think more about how I fit in the equation, more about others, and kind of somewhat of the others are more of an afterthought. And
Mm.
this oftentimes, especially the need of praising, like I need more praise than I can give you. It comes
Mm.
out of a lack of self-esteem, poor confidence, and that oftentimes comes from either a neglectful, abusive home life, or it has a lot to do with being spoiled. I mean, that's like one of the others.
mm,
So I get all the attention all the time because I'm the favorite child. Because I
mm,
get that all the time, that's what I believe. That's all I know. Or I
mm,
get very neglected. And now I may know more about that, the fact that I'm neglected and
mm.
not seen as not given my basic needs aren't met per se. So
Right.
in adulthood, I need to have my basic needs met. So
Wow. Okay.
so we see a lot of that, and that's in a lot. There's really there's a lot of that going on, and
Mm,
it happens in men and women, but I see it more in men because men tend to
mm,
use one side of the brain, more the logical side rather than the emotional side. And so I think I mentioned this uh, one of the other programs, but we're boys and girls are conceived the same way. So our brains are the same. Emotional side, creative side's on the right side, and the memory side and the logic side is on the left. And what happens, we're conceived that way and we're first born that way. But
mm,
at the seventh week in utero, for the male brain, testosterone, the hormone watches over the brain. And so there's a three-strand cord that connects the right and left hemisphere. That is severely damaged by
mm,
the testosterone. So information for the males tends to come into the logic side to the left side, the logic and memory side. But the problem is it doesn't cross over to the right side. So I don't have the same amount of empathy or emotional
mm,
context to what's going on, what's happening. And so if you add to that, growing up in a home where big boys don't cry, go to your room if you're going to act away, stop acting like a baby, and there's poor role modeling for expression of emotion or dealing with emotion. That's why it's so difficult for men a lot of times to empathize or to have
mm,
emotional connection with somebody else. So real quickly, so for women that work with men or live with men, married to men, that when there's an emotional context to what you're talking about, you want
mhm,
to ask them, what are you thinking? Start out with that rather than what are you feeling, because they won't
mm,
connect to the what they're feeling. It'll be like phew, it'll just go over their head. So so you want to start out, what are you thinking? And it'll morph into that eventually. And you can ask them about a feeling, but not right away because it'll be like a deer in the headlight. So that all is all part of this issue that I'm not empathetic, and especially because it was never about me. And so now as an adult, it's all about
mm,
me.
mm.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. I mean,
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, it seems that culture itself is catering to narcissism, and with social media especially, and something that you're addressing too is like how does it get formed? Interestingly enough, you're saying either it's by neglect or basically the person gets what they want when they want it, right? And so
yeah,
from both extremes, and so that's how it's shaped and formed, right, during childhood.
yeah, it's primarily born more the neglect than it is more the spoiled. But the problem is it's still about
Mm,
me because I already got it. So it's the same thing. I just expect it,
mm,
you know. So now, interesting. This is seen in a lot of people, a lot of men, for example, but it's not till later. Because in the beginning of a relationship with husbands and wives, in which we need to do a session on that too. But I'll give of myself because I can do that. But once we
mm,
get settled and we get married and then things get settled down, I will tend to revert back to what about me because I don't need to give. You know, men
mm,
are good about pursuing. Men are
mm,
typically more pursuers of life, and we create things like we pursue the road and we pursue a job and we pursue a woman to get married. But once we get there, then I don't need to put that much effort into it. So I pull back, and I don't have the same. That's why women a lot of times for these types of personalities, it's like, why don't you treat me the same way? Why don't you cuddle me the same way? Why don't you put me first the same way? Well, I don't need to. I married you, didn't I? So I don't need to do that. Well, that's a first
Hmm.
mistake right there. I
Hmm.
mean, I even did that because I, after we pursue our lives, I pursued my job. Then I pursued having kids, and then everybody, everybody else is more important. And then, we had to go to counseling, so I had to retrain myself in terms of what I need to do different. So it's very common. So, so
Wow.
the, yeah, so we see that in a lot, but it's not till later on that we see it that becomes because we put up with it. We just think, oh, he's
Hmm.
busy, or she's busy, or she's got other things on her mind. Well, yeah, they do, but you become the last person on their mind.
Hmm. Wow. Now, narcissism is a mental health. Is it classified as a mental health uh, identifier for a person, or how does narcissism get categorized
Okay,
in?
so there's categories of what they call personality disorders. So if
Mhm.
people want to look it up, it's all over the internet. So look
Hmm.
up, well, you can just look up narcissistic personality, but it's the HUD category is personality disorder, and under that you have things like, I'll just list them all. You have narcissistic personality disorder, borderline, antisocial, you have paranoid, avoidant,
Hmm.
dependent, schizoid, and schizophrenia. Schizophrenia in itself is different, but more of a schizoid in terms of how I deal with life. And it's all about
Hmm.
how I deal with life.
Hmm.
Now,
Now,
another,
okay, go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, so I could go into some others, but narcissism is pretty common. But
Okay.
we
Now,
don't see it right away because that's kind of like who
hmm.
I am.
Hmm. Oh, interesting. Now, not to throw a wrench in the wheel here, but like, where does like dementia land in this type of realm of personality disorder? Is that a personality disorder? Is that a mental health thing?
Okay, well, okay, dementia is a brain function, a medical condition.
Mm.
Right. I mean, and
Okay.
it can turn into mental health, but mental
Mm.
health has to do with primarily um, primarily with issues of uh, the brain and the brain functioning.
And that would also be in the same vein as like Alzheimer's, for example, as well.
Um, yes, Alzheimer's, dementia was in the same, basically the same thing.
Kind of the same vein.
It's
Okay.
really it's a growing of the worst of our brain getting worse in terms of its
Mm.
functioning, which is a medical problem.
Mm. Okay.
Though it still seems like it's mental health because it's the brain, but it's more of a medical function of what's
Mm.
happening. Whereas the mental health
So,
has more to do with, and then see,
mm.
okay, so the dementia will create problems with your thinking and your behaviors and so on, which is also mental health. That's what borderline,
Mm.
that's what personality disorders are. It's an interruption or uh, in your way of thinking and abnormal behaviors, perception of reality. It's distorted thinking, which can go with dementia. Okay, but
Okay.
that's an offshoot of it, where these actually are. That's what we do in as a mental health issue. That's why it's a mental health condition. So,
Interesting. Okay.
and the difference is that the mental health conditions typically come from our childhood or something in the past.
Mm.
We can it can come from how we're treated, primarily how we're treated, like abuse, or like I mentioned about our caregivers and the environment that we live in has a lot to
Mm.
do with developing how we feel later in life.
Mm.
Whereas a medical condition, whether it's like I said, dementia or some kind of a back issue or something that we have later on in life as we get older, is a medical condition, but it also can do with your emotional issues.
Mm.
That's why the Center for Disease Control in the United States says that they say that 92% of physical ailments have a psychological root. So the
mm,
problem is the emotion will shut your body down, and it
mm,
doesn't allow the energy flow of energy to be healing, because
mm,
God created our bodies has an incredible ability to heal itself. If we though get in the way of how we treat ourselves, how we hold on to things, we don't release
mm,
things. We're supposed to release things that are not good. We're not supposed to hold on to anything that's not good. The problem is the more we hold
mm,
on to, the more it shuts our body down. It shuts
mm,
the energy flow through the different meridian flowing. It shuts down because the energy is help what changes how I think to my body, to my brain, to my body, so on. And so
right.
the more I
Mm,
shut down, the more I become sick emotionally, then eventually
mm.
physically.
Oh wow! So suppressed emotions that are not dealt with can lead to unhealthy mental disorders, which could lead to personality disorders, which could lead to the various things that we're talking
Yeah,
about. Correct. That's
exactly.
why that's why it's so key to um, to deal with those emotions, right? Even if they're things that that weren't dealt with in childhood, but now we're adults and we still need to deal with them so that we can be fully healed and have a good mental health, because there's a strong connection right between our mental health and our emotional health. Now, where's the spiritual connection between all of this when it comes to personality disorders and narcissism?
Well, first of all, if it's all about me, then God has second place, all right?
Hmm.
So I'm still looking to God to get my needs met and to get praise and so on. But I have a hard time depending on God. So
Hmm.
so let's just back it up a little bit about the spiritual. So if I have a lot of emotional issues going on in my life in terms of how I feel, what narcissism or the other ones that I mentioned about, you know, um, borderline personalities or antisocial, I'm
Hmm.
so overwhelmed by the emotion that's going on that causes these things that will get in the way of my hearing God, sensing God, understanding God, even seeing God working in my life. Because these personality disorders have a lot to do with getting in the way of my being able to have a normal relationship. I mean, it's very common. Let me go to some what I talked about here is that so um, I have a hard time then having a a mutual understanding about a problem because my perception about it is so skewed. Okay,
Hmm.
so personality disorders start out most commonly by my dealing with abuse or circumstances in my life growing up. So, for
Hmm.
example, if I'm treated a certain way that's not nice, I will have an avoidant behavior away from people that are not nice.
Hmm.
Or I'll if I'm especially like borderline personality, and that's usually a borderline personality where my moods go up and down a lot. Uh, I I um
Hmm.
I change on a dime. In other words, they're paranoid of things. People
Hmm.
irritate them a lot, and there's a high function. I can function really well.
Hmm.
Narcissists function really well also in social settings, like at work. You may not always see it, but
Hmm.
personality disorders get triggered more around people that I'm emotionally connected to, rather than
Hmm.
intellectually connected to, because I can separate the two
Hmm.
in a lot of ways. So obviously, narcissists will still think of making decisions around me, but borderline personality is still acting and reacting and emotionally reacting around the way other people are because I'm protecting myself. So the more I've been yelled at, or people will get on my case, or growing up in a very abusive situation, I have no control of anything. I
Hmm.
don't know what's going to happen next. I'm always walking on eggshells. What happens
Hmm.
is, things happen to me that are really hurtful, and I have no control over it. Then as I grow up, I have to always be careful of what I do, what people say. I'm still walking
Hmm.
on eggshells, and I tend to be around people like that. And
Hmm.
so what happens is I will still have a lot of that emotion, but it's just because of who I am. And I don't realize that I'm always afraid of people, or that I'm more controlling, or
Mm,
that I raise my voice a lot, or I get upset at you a lot all the time, or I'm paranoid of people because they may hurt me. That just becomes
mm,
my personality. And so,
mm,
and that's treated, that comes because it's because of how I've had to deal with life as a child. It creates these patterns of living and patterns of reacting to life. That becomes who I am. That becomes,
mm.
I adapt my life around that. And if nobody tells me differently, if nobody heals that emotion that creates that, I will then grow up into adulthood. And the longer I have it, the more it becomes who I am. And that's my personality.
Wow, it's like the roots get deeper and more ingrained into the person's persona and personality if it's not dealt with early on. You're saying, wow, that's eye opening and disturbing all at the same time. Now, I'm curious. I'm not a psych major by any means, but I find all this very fascinating. What is the difference between borderline personality disorder and dissociated identity disorder?
Okay, so let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
So, I wanted to go over this anyway. I want to throw in
Okay.
there bipolar.
Oh yeah, good, good, good.
Okay,
Yes.
so there's a lot of confusion, uh, and I've noticed over the years of working with this, when I have people that go to the hospital are having and they have these mood swings, and
Mm,
they get overwhelmed about something, and they get really hostile, or they get really angry, and then they calm down. And that a lot of times what'll happen when you don't have a good treatment or time to evaluate the person, they're typically given they're usually typically given the not borderline, but it's typically the other one. It's you know bipolar disorder. So
oh,
bipolar
bipolar.
disorder
Okay.
is very similar to reactions to a borderline. The difference is
Mm,
that bipolar is a chemical imbalance in your brain that
mm.
is treated with chemicals, or with
Oh, okay.
psychotropics. And so, and you can have a normal life with that, but you can also get rid of it, as far as I'm concerned. But I
Mm,
also see that it's also triggered by what happened in your past. So there's still
mm,
a connection. Whereas borderline
hmm,
is primarily because of how I was treated in my past. But the mood swings
mm.
will happen similarly. The difference is with borderline, people can trigger it a lot faster, whereas with bipolar, it's a chemical imbalance. So it doesn't matter
Mm,
whether it's people or not. It just happens, and it can happen for a week. I can have short term bipolar disorder, whereas it comes and goes within a day. It could be I could
wow.
get depressed for a week, and I go into severe depression. Like there's manic
Mm,
depression, and there's depression where I'm a manic. Like I can, like you go out and you drive really fast and you do some really stupid things and very risky
mm-hmm,
things,
mm,
and that's what manic in terms of
mm. Okay.
borderline. Yeah, and then you have the depression type where you can go to manic, you're really high, and a lot of people take drugs that time, or they drive
Mm,
fast, or they're talking really fast, or they can't sleep, and then they crash, and then they go into
mm,
depression for several days to a week. I don't want to live. Life doesn't make sense anymore. They're suicidal. So it can have these severe ups and downs, and doesn't. So that's more of a chemical imbalance, and that should definitely be worked on
hmm.
with the doctor and a psychiatrist primarily, and then be evaluated for that and get on. See somebody that not only. I always tell people get on
Mm,
medication first, and then
mm.
work on that over time to work on healing the emotional part of it. Whereas
Okay.
borderline, okay, so then borderline personalities, we can get into this to kind of morph into this issue about the
Mm-hmm,
treatment of it.
mm,
So to in the and then you wanted the identity. I know you
mm-hmm.
mentioned the identity, but
Yeah, DID. So you're saying that the major difference between bipolar, NPD, BPD is that bipolar is something that is more medically treated because it's a more of
Right.
a
It's
chemical
more of
type
a medical.
issue,
Yeah, it's
where
more of a medical issue than it is more mental health.
more of a medical issue. Okay, and where
Even though even
BPD.
it is a mental
Okay,
health condition, all right, but
okay,
it's treated more medically, all right.
I see. I see. Okay, interesting.
Now, and then the other one you mentioned was DID, which is
DID. Yeah.
yeah, identity. It's dissociative identity disorder. Now, um, that's a whole nother ball game. Okay, so
Okay.
that is a mental health condition, and
mm,
also typically because of how we're treated, it's not it's not under necessarily the category of borderline person or the personality disorder because it's a whole nother category.
mm.
It's usually out of abuse and always is. So
Trauma,
DID,
right?
yeah,
Trauma.
dissociative identity disorder used to be called multiple personalities.
Okay.
So people that have been around long enough, they know the old movie Sybil about the woman that had multiple personalities.
Mm,
Anyway, that was multiple personalities. So well, here's what happens with that, and because I don't want to get too much into that, that's a
sure.
whole other area. So when I'm especially a child and I'm very vulnerable, and I'm very vulnerable to things that hurt me, and so what
Mm,
happens is if somebody's traumatizing me and it's really severe. It's a big T trauma, big in terms of how they're beating me or how they're treating me. If my body can't handle it, I will shut down emotionally, and if it gets really severe, I will actually disassociate myself from it. That's why people say I kind of see
mm,
myself seeing it from a distance, or
mm,
I'm physically up here, but my emotions down here. I shut the emotion down, and then my personality kind of breaks off into another realm, so to speak, and I'm seeing it.
mm,
And a lot of people then that emotion goes to that place, and to handle it, they create a new personality, something
mm.
that handles it. And this is without multiple personalities come in. And I dealt with
Okay.
people they could have 18 to 70 personalities,
Wow.
depending on how much I've been treated,
Wow.
how badly I've been treated. I keep on breaking it off. But these personalities, so to speak, are simply just parts of my brain that my emotion goes to, and then I assign a name to
Mm,
it. That's
mm,
why people with DID will have a loss of space and time, like they
mm,
won't remember a certain time, or they
mm,
start acting like a child all of a sudden. Not just
mm,
immature, they're acting, whereas that may be just kind of part of your personality. They actually start acting like a child because they're acting in
mm,
that, especially when circumstances or feelings come on me, which is similar to what I felt during the time of treatment, it triggers my brain to go into that type of mode of thinking to protect myself.
mm.
It's all about protecting myself. All right.
Oh wow. Oh wow. So like you're saying, like the soul gets splintered in a sense in order to protect the core personality from being traumatized further, right? I know I'm kind of simplifying it, but I just want to speak or for those watching to understand this better. Is
Yeah.
is is that more like obviously I'm condensing a lot, but is that bottom
Yes. We
line
have.
basically what
Yeah.
happens?
A common word they use now is splintering. It splinters my
Okay.
personality. All right.
Yeah.
So now that treatment again. There's not a whole lot of medicine for that. I mean, there isn't any. So
Mm,
they'll treat their anxiety. They'll treat the same thing in personality disorders. Now, that's not a personality disorder. It's simple, but it's similar in the sense that there's not a lot. There's no drugs for that. What they do is
mm,
they treat the depression. So when you get depressed, or they treat the anxiety to help kind of regulate your moods, so they can work with it. Now,
mm.
if you sense you have that, I would definitely find somebody that really knows what they're doing. That's more of a specialty mental health. It's a mental health issue for sure. I would find someone that you ask when you call a mental health agency. Ask them, do you deal with or evaluate and diagnose and treat people with DID, and see what they say. So you want to find somebody that has the ability to do that. All right.
Okay. Good. Very good.
So and even if you are suspecting anything, whether it's depression or borderline personality or narcissism, you want to ask the people, do you have someone that knows what they're doing with this? All right,
Mm,
whatever it is. And it's because you can have generalists that that treat just about anything, but if they've got,
mm,
I always tell people, if you're going to ask for a counselor, I always recommend get somebody more than at least 5 years to more than 10 years experience. I
mm,
mean, the more experience they have, the more types of clients they've seen over time, the
mm,
better. And I always recommend. I mean, there's two levels of care, three levels of care. And I know I'm a little off the topic, but for treatment wise,
that's
there's
okay.
master's levels. You have masters in counseling, masters in social work, which is fine. Those would
Mm,
really help make sure they've got the experience you're looking for. Then you got PhD,
mm,
PhDs, which is and they could have a PhD in anything. They could have a PhD in education, and they're doing mental
mm,
health work. You really want
mm,
somebody a PhD that's got clinical in psychology, all right,
mm,
not in education of something. And plus, PhDs tend to have they started out in testing in schools and in academic situations, testing for this stuff. So, and there's a lot over time. What's happened is a lot of psychologists um, they rather do counseling because you get more money in that,
mm,
and insurances don't pay for testing much anymore, so you don't
mm,
get so they're still good at what they do. I'm just saying that usually you're paying more for them. They
mm,
also are good, but that doesn't mean they have the same amount of experience that the master's level. And then the third category is your psychiatrists. Now, psychiatrists are the ones that are MDs. It's like an internal medicine or a neurosurgeon or an orthopedic surgeon. They just happen to specialize in psychiatry. Now, psychiatrists years ago, they used to do a lot more counseling. I would not go to a psychiatrist for therapy uh,
mm,
because they don't have a lot of training in that. They have more
mm,
training, and they have some, but it's primarily in psychotropics. In other words, in mental
mm,
health drugs. And so more
mm,
doctors, more and more psychiatrists are not doing counseling because they don't make as much. They can get maybe $200 in working with a person for an hour doing
mm,
counseling, but they find more and more. I could see I could see 4 to 6 clients in 1 hour checking on their meds, which is what they're specialized in, and I could get $200 for each of those. So I'll make a
mm,
ton of more money seeing people for medication, which is fine. So
mm,
if you're a psych, and there's a lot of states that are having less and less psychiatrists available. So if it's your
mm,
typical medication for things like anxiety, depression, I recommend just go to your family practitioner or your PCP or your regular family doctor. But if it's something that
okay.
needs to be evaluated, diagnosed, and really treated, something serious
Mm,
like that you need medication for, go to a psychiatrist. But I recommend people not getting on medication or getting on medication, but when you are, see a counselor also while you're working with it. Look, mental health medication, I'm not against it. All I know is that sometimes it just squelches the feeling. So it's
mm,
still inside of you. You're going to feel a little better, but it doesn't solve it. It doesn't cure it.
mm, mm,
But and unfortunately, and I don't agree with this, but most of the mental health industry and the AMA and so on, uh, they will say APA, they will say the American Psychiatry Association, they'll say that a lot of stuff's not curable. Like they often say that personality disorders are not curable. I don't agree with that at all.
mm,
The biggest problems, they are very difficult to deal with. The reason for that is the person has to believe they have it and they have to be willing to get the help for it. And
mm,
personality disorders are typically disorders that were created over time. So they don't even see that they have it. Usually you
mm,
have to learn to have it through somebody else and you
mm,
have to learn about what it is. And most people, personality disorder, it's your personality. That's why it's called that. But it's a disordered personality. and they don't typically see it. And so, if you
Wow.
know you have it and you want to get help, there's people that have gotten cured of it. All this stuff, borderline personality, and you can get that if you want. Narcissism, but you have to want it, and you have to have somebody that knows
Mm,
what they're doing. You have to go back to the past with the issues that need to be gotten rid of. Now, if you want to
mm,
learn more about about the how we deal with our personality when we get it, not
mhm.
necessarily in my book. I have in the back of the book I have it, but the actual like a borderline or anxiety and depression, so on, narcissism. But in terms of how do we get there, why is that? I recommend my book, Breaking Emotional Barriers to Healing. So you can.
Yes, and yeah, actually, I'm showing right now for those watching, you can scan the QR code if you're watching on TV, or you can go to insightsfromtheheart.com, insights with insightsfromtheheart.com, and you can go there to locate Craig Miller's book, Emotional Barriers to Healing. And if you're listening to this, you can just go to his website, insightsfromtheheart.com.
So the book really talks about why do we, how did we get a lot? It's a multitude of things, physical and emotional issues. How do we get that? What is it about our past that
Hmm.
makes that happen? And then what do we do about it? Like there's a lot of self care prayers in there. There's a lot of
Hmm.
self care. How do we care for ourselves? How do we get out of it? And really, we need to then find where we got it from. Say, look,
Mm.
anything that's not good, and if you want to, if you have a person of faith, anything not of God, like all these personality disorders and depression and anxiety, even physical issues, they're not of God. So we had
Right.
to get them. We get them then because they're not of God. It's not who we are. We were given it by a person or a circumstance. So we need
Mm.
to find out, when was it given to us? Well, it's because of how you were treated or how you grew up or something that happened, and or it could be a generational issue. I mean,
Mm.
if 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 I grew up, or even in utero, I talk about this in one of an earlier time, and I think
Mm.
emotional and physical
Yes.
healing. That in utero, if your mother's pregnant with you and your mother has a lot of anxiety because of certain things around her, her
Mm.
adrenaline, which will her adrenal gland produces adrenaline because of the anxiety. The anxiety is the fight or flight chemical, so it helps the body to do something
Mm.
with it. But that chemical washes over the baby, so the baby then
Mm.
the in utero becomes anxious, and so the baby then produces adrenaline from their adrenal gland. But because the
Wow.
adrenal gland is so small, it exhausts the adrenal gland, and you're born with an exhausted adrenal gland, which produces an anxiety disorder.
Mm.
And that's where
Wow.
ADD comes from. That's where like anxiety issues and
Mm.
hyperarousal issues come from. And then if typically your mom or dad still has that anxiety going on growing up in your home, it doesn't go
Mm.
away. Remember, if nobody tells you
Wow.
different, that becomes who you are. Oh, I've just got this anxiety issue. No, you don't. You got it from somebody else. That's not who you are. It was given
Right.
to you. Does that make sense?
Wow. Yeah, that does. I didn't even realize that, that type of thing can be traveled. Right. No, utero, you're talking about the birth canal, like through
No,
like,
just in utero, like for 9 months. Now, interesting though,
okay.
there's a book. If people want more about that, about how the utero affects us, go to a. There's a book called "The Secret Life of an Unborn Child."
Mm.
It's
Wow.
it's a secret life of an unborn child, and it's I'll think of the author's name for in a minute, but um, so it talks all about you're just reacting to whatever your mom's chemicals are that's going on inside, how your
Mm.
mom reacts to things. By the 6th month, you're literally developed enough in utero that you're a seeing, feeling, sensing child. You can see
Wow.
light on the outside. You can hear what's going on. He even says that one of the reasons for breech birth is because if
Wow.
there's a lot of fighting on the outside, you're going to turn around with your feet out because you don't want to go out there.
Hmm.
So you're
Wow,
going
that is
to.
fascinating.
So what
Wow.
happens is, so for example, there's a story in there where Thomas Varney is the guy's name that's the author of that guy. He's a physician. So this a man that was like 30 years old, he was in his apartment or whatever, he was playing the piano and playing a classical music uh, concerto just out of memory. And his
Hmm.
mom came in and to say hello, and she said, "Wow, that's really good. Where did you learn that?" He says, "I don't know. It just comes to me, and I just play it." And she was there
Hmm.
for a moment, pause. She said, "Wow, that's the that's the concerto that I played all the time when I was pregnant with you."
Wow. Oh my goodness.
So we have a memory like crazy because I'll remember. So
Hmm.
startle responses, like you feel it if like a loud noise happens or something happens that's to yourself, you'll feel that the child will have a startle response. If you have
Hmm.
that enough times, that will go in the baby's memory. So loud noises will make them startled as a little girl, as a boy, or a girl. So,
Wow.
so it all starts in utero. Now, granted,
Hmm.
they say, well, why do you have a heart murmur? Well, I was born that way. Like my mom had one and my grandmother had one. That's a
Hmm.
generational curse. Now you need to pray that off
Okay.
you, but you can still get rid of it because it was given to you.
Hmm.
So my book, again, this has a
Right.
lot to do with how to find that, right? How to find the why does it happen? How does it get it? How does it affect us? And then how to pray
Hmm.
it out. And so,
No,
and I think
yeah,
I
no,
talked more about that in the other sessions, healing emotional and physical conditions.
right, right. Yes. Yeah, so go get the book, guys. It's where you can get the book wherever bookstores
Yeah, and it's
are
on
at. Yeah.
Amazon. Yeah, it's
It's on
on.
Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Barnes and
So,
Noble.
all
So
right. So I
okay.
want to make sure we get to everything about the personality disorder. So I'm
Okay.
just
I did have a question, but go ahead.
no. I want to know. That's what I want to say. I want to go back to that to answer any more questions.
Yes, yes. Okay. Um, is there a common, root emotion that stems from, various personality disorders? Like, is there a trend of certain emotion that stems from these particular things that we're talking about today when it comes to narcissism and BPD, etc.?
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to some general signs. Good question.
Okay.
Okay, so behavior and thoughts tend to be so. This is what you want to look for. So your
Hmm.
behavior and thoughts tend to be inconsistent, frustrating, confusing. Like mind game playing, kind of a thing,
Hmm.
and maybe a lot of gaslighting. That's just
Hmm.
because of it's about me, and I'm not gaslighting, and also inconsistency and um, lack of empathy is because I have a hard time putting you first because it's all about me and about what I
Hmm.
need, and I'm trying to get something met. So it's hard for me to give it to you.
Hmm.
Also, different understanding or and working. You have a difficulty understanding and coming to some conclusion together. Like you have a hard time mutually working with somebody to come up with realistic and acceptable ways to deal with things
Hmm.
because I'm always battling or defensive, or it's something that I'm feeling inside that I need
Hmm.
to, that how I'm dealing with something. All right. And I'm unaware of how these behaviors and how these causes affect others or me. So I'm really unaware of it oftentimes of what I'm doing. And then I get defensive when somebody brings it up. That's why
Hmm.
personality disorders are difficult to deal with because they're often so ingrained in
Hmm.
my who I am over time, it just becomes so ingrained who I am because it's my
Hmm.
way. Because early in my life, I had to create these patterns of behaviors and thinking and
Hmm.
actions to either protect myself or to make it work in a way that it wasn't, and then it becomes who I am.
Wow.
Now, okay, let me keep on going, and we'll talk a little bit
Yeah.
how to
Go
get out
ahead.
of it. You also treat others, especially if you're a parent, you treat others and especially children maybe either detached, like you're not emotionally connected. It's
mm,
or you're over or under emotionally uh, reactions or abusive or and irresponsible as a parent because you don't put the children first. It's because you could tell a caring mom or dad because it's all about the kids. And granted, give
mm,
it time and they need to start being responsible. So it shouldn't be all about your kids all their life. But in the beginning, you need to give enough love to the kids. It's all about loving them and giving them, it's not about giving them all that they want. And even discipline,
mm,
appropriate discipline by saying no, some timeouts and so on, that is also part of love because you have to let them know where the boundaries are, what's good and bad.
mm,
So, but the point is that you're thinking that the whole time about how can I improve my child in terms of what they're doing. Whereas a borderline or personality disorder person,
mm,
they don't think that way because
mm,
they're always battling their kids because they're not
mm,
because it's always about what I'm thinking about what I need, and your kids aren't giving you what you need. Like you
mm,
tell them to do something, like their kids are kids, so they're not going to always do what you say right away. But I
mm.
expect that.
Wow,
Okay.
that's a really good, different definition of recognizing, how so much self-focusedness would bleed into being a parent, and how it can be ingrained in the mindset and in the way of interaction even with the kid, where yeah, it's not even in their thinking to recognize that, like they're blind to recognize that particular toxicity that it's bleeding through for that child. That's just really that's just really uh wow, like
Well, so
that's
a word you use like toxic. Well, after a
yeah.
while, when you live with this, you do feel like it's toxic because
Mm,
their behaviors are not consistent. They're not willing to work with you to make
mm,
some mutual decision that's acceptable for the kids or working together. They have a hard time working with people. And so,
wow.
okay, so then what do you do about that? First of all, I recommend that if they won't go to get help, then you who sees it get help to know what to do. I've had people have come to me or ask for prayer. I do a lot of that online, and when they contact me to help them become more stable themselves and to be
Mm,
stronger and get a stronger backbone, so eventually you can make a comment about what you observe,
mm,
right? So you don't have to battle it. The problem is that you're letting them pull you down into their dysfunction. And
mm,
so what happens is you need to see it for what it is, and then either you need to pick your battles and you need to decide what do I say about it. So in the moment of the heat of the moment, you don't make a comment right back to them because typically a personality disorder person is already in this zone of emotion that they are now, that they're not going to see reason.
mm.
And so when you make a
Wow.
comment about something that's happening, they won't see that reason because they're not in a reasonable mode. It's an emotional mode. And so
Mm,
people that are mature and that are not that they're not borderline, usually they can use their intellect and emotion, and there's a balance there. Men
mm.
in general have a hard time doing the balance because of what I told you before about what happens in utero. So if you add the
Yeah.
narcissism, it's just worse. Okay.
Mm.
So what I
Okay.
recommend people do instead of at the moment, pull back a little bit, say, I'm sorry you feel that way, and then learn what you need to do, either walk away or say, listen, I don't want to deal with that right now. And then later bring it up when they're at more of an even keel level, and then bring up something intellectual because then they can relate to you at that point when they're more at the intellectual level rather than emotional. That's just conflict resolution anyway.
Wow, that's really good. That's really practical. That makes a lot of sense. Wow, I mean that's a game changer, I think, for
Yes.
parenting too.
So for a lot
Yeah.
of people, it has to start out with, and I work with a lot of people I have borderline personality. It's more in women than as in men, usually very attractive women. And because they're attractive, they were treated poorly growing up. And
Hmm.
so they haven't gotten out of that. And so they're always protecting themselves by getting upset at people really quickly. And you could be nice to them. And for 1 minute they'll be nice to you, the next minute they're calling you out on something and yelling at you, and you're like
Mm,
you don't know what to do. Most men living in the borderline personality homes, that's like they lose their personality because all they're doing the whole time, and narcissists too for women, all they're doing all the time is keeping the peace. They're
mm.
so busy trying to keep the peace by what just happened next. It's like they're always walking on eggshells because somebody else is always getting upset.
Wow, that sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting. And then they eventually come to see me because they want to get out of the relationship, but they feel, especially if they have kids, they're afraid the kids are going to have the same thing, and they will because
Mm,
that's role modeling. Oftentimes, a younger girl will fall into the same borderline as the mom because they're afraid at
mm,
the same time, but it's also role modeling. So I have to teach the other spouse whoever's not having the personality disorder, help them see it, have be stronger to do something about it, and then also be a different role model so that the kids see both sides and not just one. Because if you do nothing, then they're going to go to whatever the strongest personality is. They
mm,
got to see what you do differently. Like, no, that's not acceptable, honey, right now. I don't want to get into that. You need to see that that's not what you do. You don't have to
mm,
scream and yell all the time. But they may do
mm.
it, but you don't have to. So the child sees it as a difference.
Right, they can see what's healthy.
Right. They got to
Yeah.
see what's healthy. And if you have a hard time knowing what's healthy and how to create it, get help for that. And you got to ask somebody, do they know how? Ask them, do you know how to help the mate of a personality disorder or a borderline personality or a narcissist?
Mm.
Not a lot of therapists know really well how to do that. But that's why
Really? Wow.
I mean, look, it's not like we're trained in general how to deal with people in general and personality disorders, but it's not specifically a narcissist. It takes time to
Mm,
learn. I only really learned really well over time of dealing with people like this, and it's not like you go to school for dealing with narcissists. It's in there. It's like
I see.
a general physician doesn't goes to school for learns as a rotation and all these different specialties, but they're not a
Mm.
specialty in that.
I see. It's like, like heart surgery, for example. It's like, okay, you know how to do general
Yeah,
surgery, but not.
yeah. Well, like even psychiatrists to become a
Mm,
doctor, by the time they're psychiatrists, they've gone to school maybe 10 years. And they go through obstetrics, they go through cardiology rotation, they go
mm,
through internal medicine rotation. They'll learn it all, but they decide to settle with psychiatry, and they go through a mental health rotation. All the doctors do, and that's kind of what we do also in the mental health field is we see all these different things, but it doesn't mean we're a specialist in it. We become more of
mm.
a specialist out of doing it, out of our experience in it.
I see. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's why you recommend to have a specialist over, 5 years or preferably over 10,
I
right?
mean, yeah, and they don't have to be a total specialist. Just they have to have an
Mm,
adequate years of experience, and ask them about it. Don't be afraid to ask. You're paying for the service. I mean, if it doesn't go
right.
well and it's not a good match, then find another therapist. You're not obligated to stay there. Remember, I always tell people, look, you're paying for a service, even for your doctor. You're allowed to ask questions. If you don't like the doctor and they don't let you ask questions because they're some kind of superior over you, then find somebody else. There's too many doctors out there. So, but it's like when you get your car fixed, you're paying for a service. When you go
Right.
to get your mind fixed, you're paying for a service.
Right. And what you shared earlier was, I think, really helpful to identify how to navigate towards a solution. Because I think people who are not well versed in this whole realm of psychology and some of these terminologies and what each thing means, like we addressed, the difference between bipolar and BPD, for example. It seems like the first half of the battle is the identification, and then the second half of the battle is then working through any of those emotional root issues that are causing that personality disorder to occur in that mental health state, right?
Right. So especially for the mate or the person dealing with it. It's identification that that's what they have, and then also how do I deal with it? How do I help them? And
Mm,
you need to be. You're not responsible for them, for that other person, but you're responsible for yourself and what you can do. Because I tell people you need to get stronger about it. And education. Um, there's uh, there's there's a lot of information out there on Google and just in general, books that are out there regarding all these topics: narcissism, borderline, antisocial. Read up on it, and
mm,
I really recommend, even when you get counseling, don't look to the therapist or somebody talking to be your be all and end all to give you all this information. There's too much out there. And
mm,
so I recommend you read up on it. There's a good book out there. My book would be good for general information about how we get this, what I can do with it. Then I would, if you identify a specific diagnosis, even if it's a mental health or a medical
mm,
diagnosis, I recommend you read up on that diagnosis and why they have it. And I talk a lot about, in general, how do we get this? Because there's reasons why we have things that are not God, why we're holding on to emotional
mm.
issues, why we're holding on, we can't get rid of this physical issue. And I talk a lot about that. So, and then obviously talk to somebody about it, and ask when you go to the call a counseling office, ask them if they have experience in this issue or that issue. And
Yeah.
then,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah, those are really practical steps to move forward in for those that know someone who's dealing with it, a loved one or a close friend, or you yourself personally is dealing with it, on how to kind of practically move forward. From this point, we're hitting the hour here very quickly, and wow, this is the hour's gone by so quick talking about this, and we want to discuss this because this is the beginning of 2025 already, and we want to all be mentally healthy and whole, and also be equipped to help other people with if they're experiencing mental health issues and lead them to a journey of freedom and healing as well. So, uh, Craig, do you have any thing else you want to share before we close out?
yes. For the people that are living with somebody that has a borderline personality or a personality disorder, don't give up. It's very difficult living with people like this. It gets overwhelming. You feel like you feel helpless and hopeless. That's why you need to get help for how you're dealing with it, and
Mm,
read up on the information. Even if you sense it, just look for personality disorder, the traits and symptoms and treatment, and you're going to see that they don't find there's much cure to it. But I don't agree with that, because we serve a big God, and God's way bigger than this. And even if you don't have a person of faith, just realize that the answer is still out there. One of my mottos is never stop seeking your healing. There's
mm,
people out there that know more. There's always somebody else that knows more than the other person. And then the person that does have a potential, well, they have a lot of issues and they don't understand why, seek some answers for that yourself. Go to a counselor. Even if you recommend that you go to a
mm,
counselor together and seek the answers together, and have your spouse help you with what's going on, and find somebody that has some knowledge in this, especially knowledge in dealing with past traumatic wounds, and
mm,
because that's where it comes from. Uh, um, so this personality disorder is a result. It's not an origin. It was it
mm,
was it was a result of something that's happened. And so the most important, find out what happened, find out where the symptoms start, get rid of the symptoms, and then the condition will leave. The same thing with emotional and physical issues in general. And that's what my book Breaking Emotional Barriers is all about. Even if you want to start with this, and that'll just give you a general information. All right.
wow. Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Craig. Wow, this has been a very insightful episode, and appreciate you talking about this and addressing this because there's a really huge need out there right now when it comes to mental health and people dealing with these various issues, or people knowing other people that are struggling with this, and looking for true, legitimate solutions and answers. So everyone, go to insightsoftheheart.com to learn more information about Craig's book. And for those that want a better understanding of narcissism and personality disorders, and just all of what this encompasses when it comes to mental health, this is the episode that you need to share with them. And please, if you could support the future of this podcast, go to talkswithgallagher.com. And Craig, can you just close us out with a word of prayer?
Sure. Thank you, Father in heaven, for who you are, and you are the great physician. And even those that don't know you, Lord, we just thank you that you're going to guide them to bring to a better place. Help people find exactly where they need to go, who they need to see to get the help, where they need to go in their heart because of what's happened to them that may have caused some of these things. We release it, Lord. We just release it, help them to release the emotion that's causing a lot of the hurt inside, that then is causing conditions, and the conditions are causing difficulty just to live life. And we just thank you what you'll do. And we thank you for the healing that you have for them physically, emotionally, and spiritually. In the name of Yeshua, Jesus, we pray and declare. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Wow. Thank you so much, Craig, for praying for those watching and listening, and everything that you shared today. Really appreciate you, and I can't wait to have you back on again.
All right, good. Well, good to see you again, John. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Likewise. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to Talks with Gallagher. We're actually going to be doing a broadcast in about an hour with Shane Mason talking about artificial intelligence. So if you have time tonight, we'll be going air with him on that discussion. So thank you, everyone, for being with us at this time. Until next time, we'll see you soon.